Today we're at Deal Castle. Hopefully you joined us last week for Walmer Castle. Walmer Castle is probably the better known, sits just down the beach outside of the picturesque village of Walmer. Deal is a slightly smaller artillery fort, sits right on the beach today in the middle of a town. Both of these were built along with a third fort, which is really to all extents and purposes gone now, as a Tudor defence. As the river into Sandwich started to silt up and it stopped being a viable port, the Cinque Ports Federation needed to have a defensible position along the coast, and they identified this stretch as not just a fishing port, which it was, and you still see ships pulled up on the shore here, but as a really good anchorage that had to be defended. So Henry VIII designed this fort. Now I'm sure that Henry VIII designed this fort means he told someone to, but there's often the claim that he actually designed it himself. You can see a very similar structure with the rose-shaped battlements, and then again inside of the ramparts there, those bastions sticking out with the guns on, is another layer of rose petal towers, and then in the centre another tower, and each one offers a strong defensive position. You can see today only the top levels are castellated, but the bastions offer a really good field of fire, and there would have been a series of cannons all the way around. It would look like a porcupine, offering a very strong defence. Anything in the first half mile out to sea, and would be enough to put you off landing here. But as you're going to see, when we go inside, the castle is way bigger than it looks. And we weren't able to film inside the castle itself at Walmer because there are private collections that aren't owned by English Heritage. They don't allow it. But here, there's no such restriction. And as we go down into the tunnels, you get a feeling for what a Tudor fort was like. It was designed not like an old Norman castle where you had strong walls, battlements, firing positions, castellation along the top, and that alone was enough to put anyone off attacking. By Henry VIII's day, that simply wasn't enough, because there were cannons. Even every soldier had a musket. So muskets, cannons, various siege equipment, you needed something a lot more powerful and something with a lot of interlocking fields of fire, no blind spots, no corner where you can dig a hole and undermine the wall. And here, as you see at Camber Castle and Walmer Castle, is a really good example of a Tudor artillery fort where every piece of the wall is firstly very thick and deep and could take a very strong hit, and secondly covered by firing positions the whole way round. If you saw our video on Southport Castle, very similar. You can not go down into the tunnels there. They haven't renovated them after the latest set of blood or anti-blood work was done. But here you can, and you really see the innards of the castle are probably 5 times bigger than you expect them to be. We had to walk at quite a bit of speed around here because I remember from my last visit at Deal how many tunnels there are. So we're heading inside, and we were a little late in the day, so not wanting to hang around, straight out past the shop into this courtyard, which is the first bastion. And you can see these great curving walls, a mix of the original stone and some brick that was probably added more around the Napoleonic era. And the depth of these walls, down there you're very sheltered unless someone can get a mortar over the top, and you can see why mortars developed during this era. Up here it's a slightly domed, you can't quite see it, but the floor is not really domed but gently curving to allow the movement and positioning of the cannons. And the bastion runs all the way round. There wouldn't have just been one cannon here, there would have been a series of them. And here is Deal Harbour, except there isn't a harbour, as the sign points out, but it is a port. Because you could no longer sail down and openly navigate to Sandwich, this port developed here, which was fairly unusual in Britain. We tend to have a harbour for a port. I've seen it more on a continent. If you go to somewhere like near the Peenemünde testing plant where the V1 and V2 rockets were designed by von Braun, just over the border in Poland is Sopot. And Sopot is a beach like this where the boats are pulled up on the shore. You do have a few up north, but I'm struggling to think of one right now. This whole stretch was known as the Downs. Now, it's not the South Downs, it's an anchorage off the coast here, and it was an ideal landing place. So 3 forts were built here, very strong, very defensible, very good firing positions across the whole harbour and the beach. And Walmer is only about 2 miles down. Here you can see these steps here. I would suggest that there used to be a rail on these sloping stones, and a cannon, a larger cannon later on, could be swung along the rail. You see that at places like, I think, Upton and at Dover Castle. If you watch our video on that, there's a few emplacements where you can see that style of gun position. And here, where the flag post is, no guns there today, but all of this wouldn't have been turfed. It would have been a battlement brimming with weapons if the need be. And you actually can't get further around now, so we'll head back down and straight into the central tower. And although the tower is a bit like a medieval keep, fairly small, it is still quite large. There's 2 floors, you can't get to the roof anymore, and there is a series of tunnels underneath, and the tunnels burrow round the outside battlements and also down through, weaving through the whole structure. And there's a large series of rooms at the bottom for storing gunpowder and provisions. You see here white plastered stone, quite basic. This actually was occupied by soldiers right through till, I believe, the First World War. And certainly during the Napoleonic era, there was a squadron based here. And it's basic, strong, big, deep, probably quite cold in the winter. Beautiful big ingle nook fireplace here. And there's a good explanation of the history of the castle from when it was first conceived by Henry VIII. Supposedly this was also linked to Anne of Cleves, and she had quite some say in the construction and upkeep of it. And there's a map of the geopolitical structure of Europe at the time, with the southern Italian states, the Papal States, the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire. And very well explained, quite simple and accessible, but a good 3D map. There's these audio tour, rather than take them round with you. You can sit on the throne and listen to Anne of Cleves or Henry VIII. There you can see a bread oven here, and also a sort of furnace entrance for an oven back there. We head on round. You see the hand pump there. Reminds me a lot, that pump, of the one we saw last week at Walmer. Here's a plastic toy for children to build and construct the castle out of portions, and you get a feel for the interlocking structure, because this is architecturally designed purely for defense. So everything is about how can we improve the defense, how can we close down an angle of attack. Here an explanation of Coleshot and Sandgate. Sandgate is now long gone. Camber is just a shell, and you can go inside it about once a month. We went to Walmer last week actually, and we'll be off to Deal. Further along the coast, these were all built in this era, but quite different. Like Portland Castle is fairly different to this one. It's a bit more like Upnor Castle that we did a video on. We'll have to make it down to Portland Castle at some time. As we come round, series of architectural finds, from armor-piercing arrows to what looks like a halberd or an axe, and a spearhead there. Quite interesting pieces. It's an old fireplace that shows there's been a lot of construction work and changes here over the years. And this shows you how it's a bit bigger than it initially looks already, because the central building, you could just step through straight into these side firing positions, and they would have had a gun probably on a tripod fixed to the stones so that you had a steady firing shot. And these are all defending the inner courtyard. So you'd have to have breached the cannons, got over the first bastion, over the moat, over the bastion, and then you've got down into the courtyard. Here there's a tunnel leads up to the roof for ventilation. And you already start to see the interlocking shapes make a very complicated structure. It's one of those castles that you go to and you keep thinking, have I missed a bit? A lot of castles are quite big once you get in there, and particularly rooms, corridors and staircases that help to provide a second line of defense or escape, or a second route through the castle for, you know, the plebs and privileged. There's even a toilet in there. Not sure how well I'd want to use that. It's a little bit chilly here in the winter, I can imagine. There's a lovely chapel here for the armed forces who've been based here, because this was an active military base for over 400 years. And it's still kept as a living chapel for local battalions. This castle, like a lot of others, was maintained through the Napoleonic era and to some degree through the First World and Second World War, but as it became less useful against aerial warfare and more modern threats, they were moved over to the Ministry of Works, which also ran sites like Stonehenge, and that's what evolved into English heritage. So now in the centre is this beautiful spiral staircase. Now as we go up, we see this mural, 1648 Siege of Deal Castle during the Civil War. Is that 1664? Duke of York and Albany's Maritime Regiment garrisoned here against the Dutch. 1732 new apartments built. 1803, Lord Carrington, captain of Deal and Cinque Ports, was here. 1940, it was artillery headquarters. Here's an explanation of the hierarchy. You have a Lord Warden. Under the Lord Warden is the captain of Deal. And the captain of Deal had a series of soldiers. What that composition of soldiers looked like has changed a lot over the years. But now you see we're through into the second floor. And again, it's those beautiful oak beams with door walls all the way around. It's dividing this into different rooms with these beautiful fireplaces. But the overall structure, the layout of the multiple windows all angling in, is still in place. And although you see a series of rooms, it's large, but it's not that large. There's some odd shaped rooms here. Here's the Deal captain's coats of arms in this almost looks like a pantry. Not really a room in a castle like this. It's a strange little corner room in a building with no corners. But each of these has been captain of Deal Castle. As we head back out, you see some elements of older structure, some probably more modern panelling, but it gives you a feeling probably of the layout of the castle back in the day, but certainly of the size and scale of it and the overall structure and design. And it's a fascinating thought that for centuries dozens of soldiers would have been stationed here waiting for an attack which as a rule never came. And it probably was quite a miserable spot to be stuck at times, even though it is a lovely little town, nice stretch of beach here. There, you see a skylight through to that roof. Here we can come out, and built into the corridors is this. Well, I imagine that was a toilet. The next room has this interesting piece on the wall about was it a castle or a residence? Because it was both. Whether you'd call it a residence is another matter. But it certainly was lived in. It was like an army barracks. And for the captain of the fort, probably a pleasant barracks. But whether it was for the soldiers, I'm less convinced. They often, these artillery forts, weren't particularly well looked after, especially as the forts became a bit less relevant when they were the cutting edge of naval defence, defending the crown back in Henry VIII's day. They were probably very well looked after. But later on, as we go into Georgian, well, they weren't really as important, so a lot less thought was put into the soldiers who are here. But we're going to head out now and down into the tunnels. So it's back out into this central corridor, and then we make our way back down. You can see there a little staircase. That staircase, or ladder really, lets you get out onto the outside where there's another set of bastions. And above us here is the main roof where again there would have been a defensive position. But back down, and you think, well, we've been around the castles, that's quite impressive, it's a fairly big keep. But you would have been able to go down from there. Today it's covered up. But today we go out into the courtyard, and there are two entrances from the courtyard back into the castle, which don't go straight but go straight down. So we walk down this staircase, and luckily now it's lit, back in the day it would have been oil lamps and just those angled windows that you see with shafts of light. Now remember here, the roundels, we're at this red one with these muskets. And we're going to head down into the tunnel. And the tunnel is a bit like what you saw at Upnor, if you watched our video there. But it gives you the darkness of the tunnel. And you can see just about through the edge into the courtyard. And in fact here into the moat. But we're down and you can't even see here. But see how the angles. So we follow round the path of the walls. I'll put on a torch because you can't see anything. And there's all these wider chambers where you have small windows to fire out on any attackers. But there's all these little corners. So you can see the moisture here of the calcium building up on the walls. But there's a series of chambers. And you think it's just a row of little mini rooms for people to fire from. But it's not as simple as that. Because as you make your way round, every so often the path is different. And it feels like it's getting darker. It's like something out of the Blair Witch Project down here. You see that shaft? Here you have to come back in and turn. And I believe that was a firing position for if people were inside. There's another one here. And then we make it back round past that one. And we're back into more and more. And although we're walking round the outside, you have to bear in mind where we came in. And just remember that. Because as we keep going, you think we're almost where we started. But we're not at all. And I am trying to walk around here quite quickly. It is just about one person wide, making it very easy to defend these buttresses that form rooms out of the corridor. Mean that you really have choke points. And those choke points then come across firing positions. So as you go around in this darkness with, if you're lucky you've got a torch with you, you've got defenders with muskets and bayonets waiting for you. So if you did get into these tunnels, it would be a horrible struggle to capture the castle. And you're still bearing in mind where we came in? Because we're not back there yet, are we? And you'd think by now we'd gone the whole way around. No, not at all. So, keep on round. What's that about the 20th room, 25th room? Here's another room. There's one of those little shafts. And you can see some light out there. So you think you're back out where we came in. But we're not. Because this is a completely different entrance, isn't it? We come up here. This is not the entrance. Remember that one was red. This one's green. So we've come up at a completely different entrance altogether. And there's wooden muskets here that you can play with. I was quite tempted to give a little shoot with it, but I didn't. And here's more rooms that we didn't see before. These actually are, they remind me a lot of the cellar rooms at Walmer Castle. And out under each bastion is another curved room with a light source through a window up in the ceiling. And you can see very strong doors. And there's an entire level down here. We're now in a totally different part of the castle. This isn't the portion we were in earlier. There's a staircase. But that's a staircase that leads down to the well. So we're on a totally different level from the 2 floors we went up earlier. We're now in sub-level 1, I guess, with a well and all of these rooms around. But then we can head off into the corridor here. And that's the stairs we went past. We're through into another room. But we still haven't got back to the green room we came in. So we've done half of the tunnels round the side. We came in by red, we came out by green. So which one's this? This is red. So now we're back. So you can see all of these tunnels, and these are the ones that were open to the public. There's an entire level of rooms that can only be reached from the tunnels. A whole level of tunnels and rooms under the bastions all the way round. And whenever I come here, I'm always surprised by how much space was fit in here. It's like a Tudor TARDIS. And these beautiful arched ceilings really remind me of the chapter house of a monastery. If you watch our video on Tintern or Buildwas Abbeys. And here I believe this is a printing press. Someone will probably set me right on that. It's some form of press that's being wound. Not documented what it is. I'm a big fan of having a sign to say what things are, and generally English heritage is excellent at that, because we come into a castle like this and we see some strange contraption. It really is good to have an explanation of what it is. Now we've been in the green bit, so we're going to try and find the next room. Interesting course of red brick in the wall there. It's quite out of keeping with the rest of the walls, so possibly some recycled stone or tiles. And then we're back out and upstairs, and they're quite steep, so you see how deep down we are. It's a whole floor and a half down, actually under the level of the sea, which probably explains why there's quite a few moisture marks down there that I was trying to show. And here on this level, there's another set of interlocking rooms, each one with an angled position, so you can position soldiers all the way round here. Although all the documentation talks of there being a small group of soldiers, this could easily be reinforced, and it could actually be manned by a large number of soldiers, because there was a large number of cannons, large number of firing positions, and really was suited to a much bigger regiment that would have been here by default. So I'm sure in the case of a siege or attack, it would have been heavily reinforced. And you see we're back out here on those upper battlements. And now you see that a lot of those weaving tunnels underneath in the dark, they're under this section of battlements, this concentric ring around the outside. And the storerooms lower down are underneath that courtyard and to some degree under this battlement. So although it looks like two layers of keep and outside of that are battlements, it's actually like an onion with multiple rings of buildings and tunnels on different levels. And really a fascinating insight into the Tudor fortress architects. We've been to a few. We've been to Walmer, we've been to Upnor Castle, if you check out the videos on those. But what I really like about Deal is it gives you a more bare bones access to the tunnels and structure. And unlike Camber Castle, which is just a ruin today, you can actually get in and walk around the tunnels and see the rooms. And you understand it as a Spartan functional structure, a fortress designed as really a cutting edge piece of military technology, which, yes, it's been left behind by centuries of history as weaponry evolved, but it's still a very impressive and well thought out structure. I don't know how well I conveyed it in the video, but as you walk around, you find yourself thinking, have I been to this bit? Have I missed something? And really, as we head out, I think we've seen the whole of the castle. Hopefully gave you a feeling at speed of the structure and what you'd see. And here's one interesting piece. The cannons at the front are not Tudor. They're much later, probably Napoleonic era. But here is an old style, more Tudor style cannon, almost on a sled. Much smaller, but easy to move and easy to put plenty of them in here. As I look out over the sea, you can see the anchorage is beautifully covered by this castle, like a little porcupine of cannons sitting on the beach. And the beach really is very close by, but not so easy to attack, and really achieved what they wanted to by building these 3 forts along this stretch. The Downs anchorage simply wasn't worth the hassle of attacking and was mainly left untouched. So I hope you enjoyed our visit to Deal today. This small, rather unassuming castle in the middle of a small town. You look at it from here, it doesn't really look like all that much. Just an interesting old fort. But hopefully you see inside it's actually a very complicated, sophisticated machine, architected, designed and constructed to dominate its space. And really the perfect descendant of a medieval or Norman castle. And I certainly like Deal Castle, so I hope you did as well. Well worth a visit, quite a reasonable price, especially if you're a English Heritage member. So please do like and subscribe. Come back next week. We'll have a very different historic site next Saturday. And of course, we're back on Monday with our Monday museum tours. So click that subscribe and click the bell to make sure you don't miss out on any of our videos. And see you soon.